Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, boys and girls. We're back. I'm Eric Coughlin, and this is Just My Thoughts. How you doing? Today, on the Thought Tracker, we're going to break down the WCW downfall. That's right. Everything that they had to offer, everything that they did in their shows, all their competitors, everything that made WCW worthwhile. We're going to break that down. So essentially, I've broken it down into about four different categories. At first, I was going to kind of do a comparison of WCW to WWE, which was actually WWF back in the day. It's WWE now. It has been WWE now for a very, very, very long time. So that's what we were going to do. But the more I kept on generating, topics of discussion, the more I realized that if I did both sides of the shows, if I did WCW and I did WWF, I'd probably be on here for about an hour and a half, and I just don't got that kind of time for me or for you guys. You guys are not going to listen to a man talk about wrestling for an hour and a half, let's be real. So let's just break down WCW in its general form. So what I have done is I brought up, like I said, four different categories. I brought up old school wrestlers that pretty much paved the way for WCW. I brought up and this is top fives. So top five old school guys that paved the way for WCW. Then I got the top five young and upcoming wrestlers that pretty much made WCW what it was. The reason why I watched, for instance, and what I think everyone else watched, for instance. Of course, everyone likes old school guys, but the real talent are the guys that were younger, faster, stronger. So I broke that down. I also broke down the guys that made WCW fun to me. Every time I would watch, see, it was crazy, right? So being as a fan, as a child, I would try to watch both shows, which was almost impossible, but it wasn't too impossible, though. It was actually kind of easy, now that I'm just thinking about it. So I would watch Monday Night Nitro, WCW, because it was always live. And then I would catch on Saturday mornings and Sunday mornings, I would catch the Raw recaps, right? And I did this for years, from like 96, 97, 98, 99. I was a premier WCW guy. You never heard me say that out loud, but you're hearing me say that now. I was the WCW fan. I was not the WWF fan until, the merger and WWF taking over. And like, to be honest, WWF was getting popular, but it was getting popular around 98, 99, 2000. About the time the merger happened is really when WWF really started taking off. True factor is WCW was already had taken off. WCW was already more popular. They had all the guys. They had all everything that WWE presents. WCW had already had it going on. So, like I said, I was a WCW guy. Another category was the infamous backstabbers of the WWF that slide their way into WCW. So let's get into that. Let's break down the top five old school guys in the WCW. Guys like Hulk Hogan, who was actually Hollywood Hogan. He was Hulk Hogan in WWF. He was Hollywood Hogan in WCW, which he might have been both. Hollywood is what he turned into with the NWO. So before he was with the NWO, I'm pretty sure he was always Hulk Hogan. So how you doing on that? And I give him the number one spot because like he was worldwide famous, right? Like wrestlers are wrestling world famous, and then some wrestlers are worldwide famous, and that's what Hulk Hogan was. Hulk Hogan was a worldwide phenomenon athlete, so that's why he's number one on the list. Number two on the list, Ric Flair. A lot of people would say he should be number one on the list. A lot of people say, oh, he's won the title more than anybody in the world. In WCW, he holds the record for most title wins. 16 times he's won WCW heavyweight title. So a lot of people think he's the number one guy. I do not. I think as far as popularity, as far as what made the show work, as far as being known worldwide, I think Hulk Hogan just takes that title. That's why he's number one. Ric Flair was number two. Number three guy, uh, of course, the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. And the reason why he's number three is not only was he good, like he also had sons that were good. Cody Rhodes still wrestles, has been wrestling for 15, 20 years. He's still in shape. He's still looking good, still doing good. Just beat Brock Lesnar last weekend at Backlash. So if you didn't know that, you know that now. So and then Goldust. So if you didn't know that, if you didn't know that, if you didn't know this, you know this now. Goldust and Cody Rhodes are essentially brothers, and Goldust is just Dustin Rhodes. That's who Goldust is. He's Dustin Rhodes, and this Cody Rhodes is older brother, and he is the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes' son. So American Dream made number 3. Number 4 was Macho Man Randy Savage. Now, I loved Macho Man Randy Savage growing up as a kid. I loved him because he made wrestling kind of exciting, right? He always was twirling around, dancing around, and he had like the cool jackets with the damn like leather straps coming off of them, almost like a biker, right? But it's like with yellow and red representing the Slim Jim logo. He was always all about, you know, slapping it to a Slim Jim. It's one of his biggest freaking what would you call them, promoters, I guess you would call them, or yeah, promoters, I guess is what you would call. He worked out deals, almost like how basketball players work out Nike deals and stuff like that. He worked out a deal with you know, Slim Jim, so that's why he's number 4 on the list. And then number 5 on the list, another guy that was just electrifying. He made wrestling seem like it was real, even though it wasn't. He was just a all-around artist on the microphone, all-around artist in the ring, outside of the ring. He was just amazing in the wrestling world. I'm on both shows. Actually, every guy that I've just named were pretty much all WWF guys. And then when WCW took off and they needed talent, all these guys went. And I'm talking about Roddy Piper. Roddy Piper is my 5th guy. So top 5 old school guys from WCW that really made the show for me would be Ric Flair, Roddy Piper, Macho Man Randy Savage, Hulk Hogan, and the American Dream Dusty Rhodes. How you doing? So let's break down another category. That, and this is to me was the shining moments of WCW. The guys that were primed to take over in the wrestling world, all become icons, all became famous, and they all started, you know, they got their feet wet with the WCW, and now all living legends. Everyone on this list is a legend now, which is phenomenal that some of these guys actually still wrestle. So I'm going to get down into that. The guys that were going to be the up-and-coming wrestlers that were icons in today's known world. How about Goldberg being number 1 on that list? When he coming to wrestling, he was getting out of the NFL contract. He was playing for Atlanta Falcons, coming to WCW as a retired football player. I think maybe around the age, you know, 30, 31. Which is really crazy, right? Because most people get into wrestling when they're like in their 20s and stuff, and he did it in his 30s. But like I said, he had a previous career, a far more famous career. Playing in the NFL is a really huge deal. So kudos to that. Goldberg being the number 1 guy. Number 2 guy is Eddie Guerrero. So I didn't know nothing about Eddie Guerrero growing up. Never heard his name until wrestling. But, you know, thank God I've been a wrestling fan all my life. I can pretty much remember wrestling from 95 till now. And I know WCW's been around in the 80s. I know WWF was around in the 80s, stuff like that. I know that. But I know that Eddie Guerrero was young. He was a young talent. They got signed by WCW and stayed on WCW maybe, 10, 11 years until the merger. And then, you know, was in WWF for maybe 8 years before he had, you know, sadly had passed away. Number 2 guy on my list, and it's actually my number 2 guy, period. If I were to break down, which I already have done that, if you keep up with the show, I've already broke down top 5 of all time, and I didn't care what show it was, I just broke them down. Eddie was number 2 on that list, and Eddie's number 2 again on the list again for upcoming wrestlers for WCW. Chris Jericho is number 3 on that list. Upcoming wrestlers for WCW that really put WCW on the map. And again, Chris Jericho is also on my top 5 greatest of all time. He's an icon. Man still wrestles right now. Jericho might be pushing 50 years old. Still wrestles for a company called AEW, All Elite Wrestling. So he's still doing the wrestling gig. Yeah, like I said, pushing 50. He has a rock band. They're called Fozzy. I've already done all this, so I'm kind of repeating myself. But just keep you guys updated on how phenomenal he is. I am a Jericho-holic. I think that he made WCW great. I think that he made WWF great. I think that he's making AEW great. Let me tell you another funny story. So as he got older, like around 46, 47, Vince is like, hey, Chris, I really just can't do nothing with you. You've done it all. Every championship you've won. You know, I don't know what else there is for you. Your ceiling has pretty much been lifted. And so what he did was he went to Japan. What? I said he went to Japan. He wrestled for a show called New Japan Wrestling. And it was funny. He went over there, and Kenny Omega was over there, and he was like the number one guy. So as soon as he gets onto the map, he immediately attacks the top, right? Because he's Chris Jericho. That's what he's going to do. He's the Ayatollah of rock and rolla. So he starts a feud with Kenny Omega and starts beating the living crap out of him. I mean, it's like Kenny Omega was not ready for Chris Jericho at all. Chris Jericho at 47 was running circles around this guy. And so everyone in Japan was like booing Chris Jericho. Everyone hated Chris Jericho. So he's like, you want to boo me? You want to boo the icon? This is what I think of you, Japan. And he literally takes the camera from the guys that are like recording him while he's in the ring, while he's in a match, just stops wrestling, takes the camera from the guy, and flips everybody off. He pretty much tells Japan, fuck you, like the whole damn country. So that's another reason why I absolutely love him. He's number 3 on my list of icons. Here's a number 4 and worldwide famous. Everyone knows him. Everyone loves him. He still wrestles again to this day, just a lot like Chris Jericho. How about Rey Mysterio? When Rey Mysterio was on WCW, he was young, like 18, 19, 20 years old, doing it up, doing it big. And then he stayed on that show pretty much, like I said, the length of the company, about 9, 10, 11 years. He was on that show as one of their premier guys. And he was super duper young. Chris Jericho, premier guy, super duper young. Eddie Guerrero, premier guy, super duper young. And then how about Booker T as my number 5, premier guy coming up that became an icon in the wrestling world? Yes, Booker T got his starts with the WCW, and was another reason why I watched WCW, because I couldn't get enough of the 5-time world heavyweight champion doing the spinneroonie. If you didn't like the spinneroonie, I don't know what you did like, because I thought that shit was cool. The scissor kick I thought was cool. He was electrifying. He was fast. He was strong, and he was entertaining, and he became an icon. He wrestled a good 25 solid years wrestling career. That's really hard to do. It's hard to have a 25-year career in any physical sport. That's, you know, football, basketball, baseball, any sport, any physical sport. To have a 25-year run is pretty impressive. Booker T did that. That's why he is also on the list. So now let's break down the guys who I really thought, even though I don't care so much about their careers, the length of their careers. You know, some of them made it long, some of them only made it for about 2 or 3 years. But every time that I seen these guys, I felt entertained. I felt like they had a good gimmick. They made me keep on watching the show, because like, as we're watching wrestling, I do this now. I did it when I was a kid. I do it as a grown man. If you're not grabbing my attention, I might just flip the damn channel, right? So WCW had to find ways to make people not want to flip that channel, and these were 5 guys that did a great job of that. Number 1 guy, Sting. Absolutely. Now, most of the time you seen him, it was at the end of the night. He was almost always a main eventer, but you never knew where he was coming from. He could come from the arena. He could come from, you know, straight down the ramp, just like everybody else. Sometimes he did that. Most of the time he did not. A lot of times he come through the crowds, you know. A lot of times he come from the ceiling. I mean, I remember him having a cage match. They just drop him from a helicopter on top of the cage, and then he climbs on in. Just made WCW just absolutely must see. You never knew what he was going to do, and that's what I loved about Sting. How about number 2 was La Parka? If you don't know who La Parka was, he was like a giant luchador. I mean, most of the time when you think about luchadors, they're all Spanish wrestlers. By the way, if you didn't know that, you know that now. You'll never see anybody that's a luchador that's not Spanish. I'm just breaking it down to you. I'm giving you a little bit of culture and a little bit of history. They could be Puerto Rican, they could be Guatemalan, they could be Mexican, they could be freaking, you know, a Spaniard. It's all Spanish related. And that's what La Parka was. But he would come down and he'd be like playing the air guitar on a steel chair, and his whole bodysuit was nothing but a skeleton. And he did the stinky leg before the stinky leg was even invented. Like, he invented the stinky leg on accident. La Parka made wrestling very, very, very entertaining. Now, as far as being a luchador in the ring, now he couldn't do all like the flips and the hurricane ranas and the 450 splashes and the frog splashes and all that stuff that you would see a traditional luchador do, but he was Hispanic, and he was, you know, he always kept the mask, not just the mask, a full body freaking suit, man. I mean, La Parka was the man. Every time you see him coming down the ring playing that fake chair guitar, I loved it as a kid. Like, I was like 8, 9, 10 years old, seeing a skeleton play a guitar. pretty fucking entertaining, if you ask me, especially for a 10-year-old. That shit's cool. So La Parka made the list of the top 5 most entertaining. Tell you another guy that was pretty entertaining. He was very, very like old school and rugged and just so cliche because he always did the same thing. And I'm talking about Hacksaw Jim Duggan. So, you know, his music would go off, and only thing you could just picture is him holding this 2x4 screaming, ho, like he had no other, you know, words of his vocabulary. He had absolutely no schooling whatsoever. He knew how to do one thing, and that's kick butt and chew wood. I mean, that was pretty much what he sold on the show. You know, that's what he sold to WCW and to all the WCW fans. But it was entertaining. It was cool to see an old guy go out there and actually wrestle pretty good. He actually moved around pretty good. He was actually a big, strong guy. Very short on words. Didn't talk a whole lot. But it was cool. It was always cool for me as a kid to see Hacksaw Jim Duggan go down there with the 2x4, yell out ho, and then in the 15-minute match, beat up whoever was in the ring with him. Most of the time, it was understudies. Most of the time, he was like if I don't know how you would say it's like a barrier. If you couldn't get past Hacksaw Jim Duggan, you probably weren't going to make it very long in the wrestling world. So they used him as a stepping stool. You had to be able to beat Hacksaw to be able to cut it into the company. So there you go. That's what I was talking about, and that's what I think that they did with him. And I think that they did a very good job of keeping it entertaining. And then number 5 on my list number 5. It's number 4. I gave you Sting. I gave you La Parka. I just gave you Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Number 4 on the list was Disco Inferno. Just for whatever reasons, like I said, he liked to dance, he liked to sing, he'd you know, always trying to do something entertaining in the ring. Rather he'd be doing disco moves or he'd be talking crap on the mic. He always just made wrestling very, very entertaining. He was way far before his time. He would talk trash before wrestlers were even talking trash to each other. Most of the time on a wrestling promo, you get these guys out there and they're just talking about all their capabilities and the things that they're going to do in the ring. Disco Inferno was right the opposite. Disco Inferno would just about laugh at you and point out all your mistakes and how he was going to find a way to get the 1, 2, 3 because of all the things that you couldn't do and all the things that he could do. Like I said, he pretty much invented trash talking. Absolutely loved it every time Disco Inferno was on the show. I loved it. And number 5, I'm going with another luchador. How about Juventud Guerrero? Juventud Guerrero was nephew of Eddie Guerrero and Chavo Guerrero. He was the first time I've ever seen anybody do a 450 splash was with Juventud Guerrero. First time I've ever seen a reversed Hurricane Rana was Juventud Guerrero. Juventud Guerrero was creating wrestling moves like on the show, like live. You know what I'm saying? Like no practice, no nothing. You're in the show. You got 30 minutes. Go in there and do whatever you think you can do that people are going to like. So he would just do crazy things. Like I said, 450 splash, reverse Hurricane Ranas, stuff like that. And to his point, like he would do things kind of like the 619. He would like flip off of the top rope, but he'd jump off of it, do like a leg freaking drop off the top rope, end up doing like a moonsault, land on you. Just crazy, entertaining stuff that not everybody can even do, even right now. Like if people were to try to mimic and recreate what Juventud brought to the table, I would be willing to say that not a lot of people would be able to do that. And the people that can do that are probably not even on the show because luchadors are just not around anymore, at least not in the WWE. It's just like something that's dead. WCW did a very great job of having more than one type, right? So you had luchadors, and then you had your big boys, your big bruisers. You had cruiserweight guys, lightweight guys, heavyweight guys. They were very, very diverse in how many different divisions that they kept up with that WWF did not do. WWF, they had to adapt because all the things that WCW was doing. WWF pretty much had 3 pretty much premier titles. They had the European title, Intercontinental title, and heavyweight title. That was it. WCW had like 5 or 6 freaking titles that anyone could win. They had a women's division before WWF had a women's division. If you didn't know that, you know that now. It was just jam-packed full of talent. And amongst that talent is a top 5 backstabbers of the WWF that really kind of helped elevate WCW. WCW was already good. They were already a premier show. but they were still lacking something, right? They were just looking for a way to absolutely crush the talent of the WWF. So what did they do? They stole a lot of their top guys, like I've already stated. Oh, everyone on this list, almost. So all the old school guys, all those guys were WWF guys. But now, as far as the guys that made it fun, with La Parca, with Juventud Guerrero, Hacksaw, those guys, WCW guys, the WCW guys that were up and coming, Booker T, Goldberg, Chris Jericho, Rey Mysterio, all those guys were WCW guys. But even having that, they still needed the edge. So what do? They go get guys like Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and then they let them pretty much take over the show and create NWO. A lot of people think that, Hollywood Hogan is the star of NWO. Hollywood Hogan was an addition to the NWO. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash created the NWO. So that was a big, big factor. That hurt WWF a lot, losing Razor Ramon and losing Kevin Nash, which they called Diesel at the time. That hurt them. And I'll tell you another one that hurt them a lot, that it goes underrated, but it happened and it affected the show a lot. Six Pack is what they called him in WCW. His original gimmick was the 1-2-3 Kid in WWF. And then he came back to WWF to join D-Generation X as X-Pac. So if you did not know that X-Pac ever screwed Vince McMahon, do your history, because he screwed Vince McMahon about 3 different times. And it's all because he wanted to be the man. He felt like he had more to showcase than your average wrestler. He would, and in his own right, he probably did. He was like, if you were to take a premier wrestler, someone that was, strategically sound, like, Triple H, and then you were to take a wildcat, luchador, somebody like Juventud Guerrero, and you were to be able to combine their talents into one guy, you got X-Pac. I mean, he was really, really before his time, and Vince just didn't care, didn't give him enough time to really showcase himself. So he's like, fuck you, I'm going to WCW. And then he becomes part of the NWO. So if you didn't know that, X-Pac was part of D-Generation X and the NWO. And he's also part of the top 5 guys that screwed the WWF. Lex Luger, the total package Lex Luger. Lex Luger was primed to be the next guy, right? So he was going to be WWF's World Heavyweight Champion, and he was going to be cream of the crop. He was going to be the best on the show. And for whatever reasons, WCW offers him more money to not be the champion. And he tells Vince, hey, man, get lost. He said, why am I going to stick around with you? You're just now giving me a title. I've been wrestling for you for 12 years, never had nothing. Now you want to give me a title? I think I'm going to take myself to WCW. That's exactly what he did. And then he became a champion of WCW. As a matter of fact, I'd be willing to say everybody on this list was a champion of some sort in the WCW, and this is like 20 different wrestlers that we're mentioning and we're talking about, and all 20 of them of some sort was absolute champions. So I'm not just giving you names, I'm giving you like icons. And the last 5th infamous backstabber of the WWF, and the last guy mentioned in the WCW segment, Bret the Hitman Hart. So a lot of people already know this story. A lot of wrestling fans can already tell you, pretty much boils down to this. The incident that happened with Owen Hart is the reason why Bret left to begin with. And but before the incident with Owen Hart, Bret was already having problems. He felt like he was the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be. He thought he was the executioner of excellence. He thought that, second to God, and no one was his boss, which is really funny, right? Because Vince McMahon's the one that signs his check. So Vince McMahon's the one that owns the show. So Vince McMahon is primarily this dude's boss, and this dude wants to walk around like he doesn't have to answer to him, like he doesn't have to answer to anybody. Like, this is what's going on. I'm the one running the show. I don't care who you got on this roster. I'm the man. And Vince wasn't for that. Vince was like, if that's what you think, you're not even going to win a fucking title here, bud. So he strips him of his title, gives it to Shawn Michaels, and then, of course, Shawn Michaels loses it to Austin, and then, Austin loses it to The Rock, and everybody knows their history, then Triple H, and then The Undertaker, and then everyone gets that title eventually. But it used to be wrapped around Bret the Hitman Hart until he got his head bigger than his ego. I mean, he ruined himself with the company. And then, sadly enough, his little brother gets into a fatal accident. And then, like, he personally attacks. I don't know if you guys know this, but you can do your history and you can look this all up. Like, he personally attacked um, Vince McMahon, the owner of WWF, over the incident of his brother. Now, for what it's worth, I think it's great to love your family and stick up for your family. But at the end of the day, you know, everyone there, he got paid millions. You know, he signed waivers. It's not like he didn't know what he was getting himself into. He knew what he was getting himself into. Now, accidents happen in this world, and some accidents you don't get to walk away from, and that's kind of that's exactly what happened to Owen Hart. So then Brett's all like, you know, I'm gonna sue you for everything you got. After, again, after Vince has already wrote an apology letter to the entire Hart family, and writes a $10 million check to Stu Hart, which is the father of Owen Hart and the father of Bret Hart. And so this is what Bret does. He takes the check from his father and rips it in half and says, this is not even near what you're going to owe us. You're going to owe us your whole fucking legacy. So he thought he was going to get like $100 million. At the end of the day, not only did he lose his job, not only did he have to go to WCW, not only did he completely disrespect his father by not trusting his father to handle the situation between Vince and the Hart family, he only made $1 million in that lawsuit. Vince didn't really lose anything, and Vince had already wrote them a $10 million check that he ripped up and burnt because he said it wasn't enough. And the bad part was, all of it was bad, but the check wasn't even in his name. The check was in his father's name. So that's ridiculous. So not only did he screw himself, he screwed his entire family that came before him. $10 million changes people's lives. Plus, we're talking about the Hart Foundation. They already had money. Stu Hart ran and trained. He ran his own wrestling facility in Canada, trained wrestlers. People that I've already listed on this list. Let me tell you something. As a wrestling fan, I know this, and as wrestling fans, a lot of people know this. But if you don't know this, you should know this. Almost all your great wrestlers come out of Canada. People like Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens. If you like modern day wrestling, I'm pretty sure you like both of them. Guess what? They're Canadian. Edge and Christian, two of the best tag team duos of all time. Guess what? Canadian. Bret Hart, Canadian. Owen Hart, Canadian. The crippler Chris Benoit, Canadian. The icon Chris Jericho, Canadian. Do you see what I'm saying? Stu trained all these dudes. Like, they had money, and they were going to have even more money. If it wasn't for freaking Bret the Hitman Hart thinking he knew more than everybody in the world, he screwed himself, and he screwed his father, and he screwed everybody with the last name Hart. So, that pretty much wraps everything up for me in this episode of Just My Thoughts. What did we do? We broke down the WCW. I listed 20 of WCW's best wrestlers. Not all best stories, but that's just the way it is. Not everything's peaches and creams, right? And it can still be sweet, and I hope that's what this episode was. So if you liked what you heard and you enjoyed what you've seen, always feel free. Cash at me, Erick Coughlin. Hashtag Coughlin Pride. Have a nice day.